You know that feeling when you finally hit the pillow? It's like, what, 11 p.m. after just a ridiculously long day.
Oh, absolutely.
And your brain is just completely fried, your body aches, and you feel like you've been running an absolute sprint since the very second your alarm went off.
Yeah, you've been, putting out fires all day, answering just this absolute barrage of
Yeah,
emails.
but between 20 different browser tabs.
Exactly. Sitting in those meetings that, let's be honest, definitely could have been emails.
Totally. So you are physically and mentally drained, but then right as you're drifting off to sleep, you sort of mentally review the day and you realize you didn't actually accomplish anything of substance.
Yeah, that is the worst
It
feeling.
really is. That one massive critical project you swore you were going to tackle that morning, it literally hasn't moved an inch.
It's basically the defining paradox of modern work, right? It's that classic illusion of busyness.
Right.
We get completely exhausted, and that exhaustion tricks us into thinking, oh, I was so productive today. But we haven't actually made any real, tangible progress.
And that is exactly what we are dismantling in today's deep dive.
Hmm.
Welcome, everyone. We are looking at the actual mechanics of meaningful progress today.
Yeah, why we spin our wheels and how we can actually move forward.
Right. And to do this, we've pulled together some amazing sources. We're looking at insights from behavior experts like James Clear and Caroline Dawkin. We've got Cal Newport's work on focus.
We're also diving into some classic cognitive psychology on why our brains are just, well, inherently terrible at estimating time.
Oh, we are so bad at it.
Mm.
And then we've got some surprisingly profound battle-tested strategies from productivity communities on Reddit. The people actually in the trenches.
Which I love,
Yeah.
because the overarching mission today is really to move past that whole exhausting hustle culture. I mean, being busy is easy,
Right.
doing the right work is hard. So we want to look at how to build a framework of, actual focus, resilient systems, and real action.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start with a really crucial distinction from James Clear and Caroline Dakin, because it completely shifts how you view your standard to-do list.
It really does.
They draw this hard line between two behaviors that, from the outside, look totally identical, but functionally, they are opposites. They call them motion and action.
Yeah, and this is such a vital distinction because motion is incredibly deceptive. Motion feels exactly like work.
Right, it burns energy.
Exactly. It burns energy just like work. But the thing is, it never actually produces a final result. Action is the only behavior that guarantees an outcome.
Right, so to put that into context, they use some really great everyday examples. Like, let's say you want to be a writer.
Okay.
If you spend 3 hours sitting at a coffee shop outlining 20 brilliant ideas for articles you might write someday, that is motion.
Yeah.
But actually sitting down, writing a terrible first draft, and hitting publish on just one article, that is action.
Or consider personal health, right? Deciding you're going to get in shape and spending your entire evening researching the best home gym equipment.
Oh, I've been there.
Right. You're reading all the reviews and finally you order the shiny new set of kettlebells. That is entirely motion.
And the really dangerous part is when you get that confirmation email for the kettlebells, you feel fantastic. You genuinely feel like you just exercised.
Precisely. Because your brain releases a surge of dopamine simply from the purchase.
Wow.
Yeah, your neurochemistry rewards you as if you've already achieved the health goal. But lifting that kettlebell until your muscles actually burn, or chopping vegetables instead of, ordering a pizza, that is the action. Motion is simply preparation.
And just getting ready to get something done.
Yeah.
Which perfectly explains why we constantly use learning as this really sophisticated form of procrastination.
Oh, absolutely.
I know so many people who say, well, I just need to take one more online marketing course or read one more book on entrepreneurship and then I'll finally be ready to launch my business.
Yeah, it's just motion wearing a very convincing disguise of productivity.
Right. So what is the psychology behind that? Why do incredibly smart, highly capable people get permanently stuck in that motion phase?
Well, it's fascinating because on a subconscious level, motion acts as an impenetrable shield against failure and criticism.
Oh, because if you're just planning, nobody can tell you your plan is bad.
Exactly. As long as you are perpetually in that researching or strategizing phase, you're completely safe. You haven't produced anything tangible for the real world to judge.
Right.
Action, by definition, requires vulnerability. If you actually ask a client for the sale, they might say no.
Yeah. If you publish the blog post, someone might leave a terrible comment.
Exactly. If you launch the product, it might fail. So to delay that deeply uncomfortable vulnerability, our brains just retreat into motion. We convince ourselves we're being highly productive when in reality, we're just hiding.
And that dynamic is so perfectly illustrated in this blog post we looked at by Jean Brown. She wrote about this very real phenomenon of productive procrastination.
Oh, that's a great piece.
Yeah, she describes a scenario where she has this major, heavily weighted research paper due, but instead of typing the first sentence, she suddenly decides that she absolutely must clean, sanitize, and color code her entire desk before she can possibly start working.
Right, and Brown connects that impulse directly to perfectionism. The real task writing the paper carries this heavy psychological weight because she knows her actual output might not match her high internal standards.
Her good enough might actually be mediocre.
Exactly. And that is a terrifying thought for a high achiever. So the brain frantically looks for an escape hatch.
And cleaning the desk provides that.
Right. It's a safe, controlled environment where success is totally guaranteed. It delivers a quick hit of accomplishment without any of the ego risk.
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit. If I want to cook a healthier dinner, I physically need to go to the store and buy the ingredients first.
Sure.
I can't write a great paper without doing the research. Isn't motion just, mandatory preparation? At what exact point does the runway become a trap?
No, you're absolutely right. Preparation is mandatory. You can't fly a plane without a runway. The trap snaps shut when preparation becomes a permanent substitute for practice.
Okay.
The defining line is whether the motion eventually forces an outcome. If you're reorganizing your Notion workspace for the 4th time this month, or tweaking the font on your resume again instead of actually sending it out, you are extending the runway indefinitely. The plane is never going to leave the ground.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say we recognize the trap, we stop reorganizing our highlighters, we force ourselves off the runway, and we commit to taking real action.
Right.
The problem is, almost immediately after taking action, we smash right into a missed deadline. We never seem to have enough time to actually do the action.
And that is not just bad luck. Our brains are basically biologically hardwired to be terrible at estimating time.
Right. This is the famous planning fallacy. I know a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work, but the specific 1979 study detailed in Dan Silvester's article is it's still incredibly revealing.
It really is.
So they went to a group of psychology students who were about to start their senior thesis,
Yeah.
which is a massive, complex, year-defining project.
Yeah, and Kahneman and Tversky asked them to predict exactly how many days it would take them to finish.
Right. And the students confidently gave an average estimate of 33.9 days. But the researchers pushed them further. They said, okay, imagine everything goes wrong, your computer crashes, you get the flu, you lose your notes. What is your absolute, undeniable worst-case scenario?
And under those totally catastrophic parameters, the students estimated 48.6 days.
But the actual historical reality, the average completion time was 55.5 days.
Yeah.
Their actual performance was significantly worse than their imagined apocalypse scenario. I think only about 30% of these highly educated students finished within their original optimistic timeline.
In this cognitive blind spot, it scales up to massive proportions. Sylvester points to the Sydney Opera House as a great example.
Bro.
When construction began, it was scheduled to open in 1963. It didn't actually open its doors until 1973. A project managed by the best architects and engineers in the world was a full decade late.
That is wild. How is it that both a college senior and a world-class architectural firm make the exact same error in judgment?
Well, Kahneman and Tversky attribute it to two intersecting cognitive biases. The first is how we frame the project in our minds. We default to what they call the inside view.
Okay, what is that?
When we look at a new task, we construct this highly idealized, completely fictionless narrative in our heads. We focus narrowly on the specific steps right in front of us, and we assume every single step will go exactly according to plan.
Right.
We assume we won't hit traffic, the client will email back in 5 minutes, and we'll somehow feel totally energized on a Thursday afternoon.
We plan for a world that literally does not exist.
Exactly. The required alternative is the outside view. The outside view demands that you step back and look at the cold, hard historical data of similar past projects. So if the last 3 times you wrote a quarterly report took you 6 days, the outside view says this one will take 6 days. But our egos absolutely hate the outside view.
Right, because we tell ourselves, sure, those last reports took a week, but I'm much smarter now, and I bought a new planner, so this one will only take 2 days.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like packing for a vacation using the inside view.
Yeah.
You only imagine those perfect sunny days lounging by the hotel pool, so you completely forget to pack an umbrella.
Yeah.
But the outside view looks at the data, remembers that it rained on 2 of your last 3 trips, and packs a raincoat.
That is a great way to look at it. The inside view relies on hope, but the outside view relies on evidence. But there is a second mechanism at play here too, which is anchoring.
Right, anchoring. We usually hear about that in negotiations, but how does it apply to our own to-do lists?
It's rooted in the idea of the brain as a cognitive miser. The brain fundamentally wants to conserve energy. So when you invent that first wildly optimistic timeline, say, telling yourself a project will take 3 days, your brain drops an anchor.
It locks onto that number.
Right. And as the project unfolds and reality hits, a vendor is late, a software update breaks your code. A truly rational system would completely recalculate the timeline based on that new information.
But recalculating takes effort.
Immense cognitive effort. It creates friction. So the cognitive miser refuses. It clings to the anchor of 3 days and just blindly assumes you'll somehow work twice as fast to make up the difference.
Wow. So we are biologically programmed to underestimate how long things take and stubbornly refuse to adjust when things go wrong.
Pretty much.
If time is constantly slipping through our fingers like that, then the actual hours we do spend working have to be aggressively protected and maximized.
They absolutely do. If you only have a fraction of the time you thought you had, you simply cannot afford to spend it in a state of distraction. Which brings us to the methodology of execution, championed by computer science professor Cal Newport.
Right. Newport's concept of deep work versus shallow work is totally foundational here.
Yeah.
We looked at a breakdown of this from Rivers Edge UMC, and it really frames the modern attention economy perfectly.
It does.
Deep work is defined as cognitively demanding, utterly distraction-free focus. It's the kind of work that pushes your analytical and creative capacities to their absolute limits.
Yeah, this is a software engineer spending 3 hours debugging a complex architecture, or a strategist mapping out a 5-year market acquisition plan. No browser tabs open, no phone on the desk, no quick glances at Slack.
Right. And then shallow work, on the other hand, is all the logistical busy work.
Yeah.
It's the constant tab switching, the meeting hopping, the responding to non-urgent emails.
Basically the stuff that makes you feel exhausted at 11 p.m. but rarely advances your actual long-term goals.
Exactly. And Newport outlined several rules for cultivating the ability to do deep work because he argues it's a skill that atrophies if you don't actively use it.
Yeah.
One of his core rules is to embrace boredom.
Yeah.
He argues that if you reach for your smartphone, the absolute second you feel a hint of downtime, like you're waiting in line at the grocery store or sitting at a red light, you are actively rewiring your brain.
Because you're teaching your brain that it never, ever has to tolerate a lack of stimuli.
Precisely. You are training your neural pathways to expect a constant stream of novelty. So when you finally sit down to do a hard, frustrating task like writing a proposal, your brain just revolts.
It demands the quick dopamine hit of distraction.
Right. And Newport suggests combating this with what he calls productive meditation. Instead of listening to a podcast or scrolling while walking the dog, you intentionally focus your mind on a single, complex professional problem. You train the concentration muscle to hold a single thought.
And his other major rule is to treat social media not just as harmless entertainment, but as the engineered attention trap that it actually is. If a platform doesn't definitively serve a high-value purpose in your life, you drop it.
Right. Now, we have to pair this intensity of deep work with task selection. There's a really insightful piece from Zoho in our sources about the Pareto principle.
Yeah, most of us know the Pareto principle as the classic 80-20 rule.
Right.
The idea that 80% of your most valuable results come from just 20% of your effort.
Exactly. And the synergy happens when you combine these two concepts. The goal isn't just to do deep work arbitrarily. Is to identify the specific 20% of tasks that legitimately drive your career forward, and then apply deep work exclusively to them. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and maybe a bit tricky, practically speaking. Identifying the top 20% is great, but isn't there a danger in totally ignoring that other 80%?
How do you mean?
Well, the Zoho article rightfully warns about employee burnout if we try to operate exclusively in that high-impact zone. Like, we can't just ignore the other 80%, right? We still have to answer emails, file expense reports, do the basic administrative maintenance of our lives, or we'll get fired.
Right, and this is a really crucial nuance. Newport himself acknowledges that human beings have biological limits. You simply cannot sustain deep work for 8 hours a day.
Your brain would melt.
Literally, the neurological fatigue is too high. Your brain would rebel. So the goal is not to eliminate the 80% of shallow work entirely. The goal is strategic harmony.
Okay, so how do we balance them?
You use those low-impact, shallow tasks as necessary cognitive cooldowns between your intense, deep work sessions.
Oh, I see.
So you don't start your morning with email because that immediately fragments your attention. Instead, you do a grueling 90-minute session of pure, deep focus on your biggest project.
Right.
Then, when your brain hits its limit, you intentionally transition to that 80%. You answer your emails, you fill out the forms, you pay the bills. You use the shallow work to give your deep thinking apparatus a chance to recover.
It's entirely about when and how you engage with shallow work, ensuring it never interrupts the deep work.
Exactly.
That makes the whole system feel significantly more sustainable. But, all of this theory, motion versus action, the outside view, deep work, it all relies on us actually doing it.
Yeah, that's the catch.
How do we execute this on a random Tuesday morning when we are unmotivated, the coffee hasn't kicked in, and there is no external boss breathing down our necks?
This is undoubtedly the hardest part. The transition from high-level philosophy to daily, gritty tactics.
To figure this out, we dove into the raw, unfiltered advice circulating in Reddit's productivity communities. These are people really in the trenches trying to juggle side hustles, degrees, and full-time jobs without any external accountability.
And one of the most striking points from those forums was a discussion about the psychological peril of blowing past self-imposed deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
One user articulated that when you set a deadline for yourself, say, I will write 500 words by Friday, and you casually ignore it, you aren't just missing a calendar date. You are actively eroding your trust in your other self.
That is such a heavy concept. You're basically teaching your brain that your own promises mean absolutely nothing.
Exactly. If a friend promised to help you move 3 times in a row and flaked every single time, you would stop trusting that friend.
Right.
We do the exact same thing to ourselves. Once the brain learns that your self-imposed deadlines carry no real consequences, procrastination just becomes the default setting.
So to rebuild that trust, the Reddit community advocates heavily for taking the concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product from the tech world, and applying it to our daily habits. The idea is to break an overwhelming goal down into the most laughably small minimum viable step.
And the mechanism here is deeply neurological. When we think about a massive task like clean the entire disaster of a kitchen.
Which is always terrifying.
Right. The brain's amygdala perceives the sheer complexity and effort of that task as a literal threat. It triggers an avoidance response. Procrastination is really just the amygdala protecting you from overwhelm.
So how does the MVP trick the amygdala then?
By massively lowering the threat level.
Yeah.
If you tell yourself, I am not going to clean the kitchen, I am only going to wash exactly 3 dishes.
Okay.
The amygdala doesn't register that as a threat. 3 dishes is easy.
Right.
It bypasses the emotional blockage. But once you start washing those 3 dishes, you break the inertia. You've transitioned from motion to action.
Right.
And usually once the water is running and the sponge is already in your hand, you just end up washing all of them anyway.
It's a total psychological Trojan horse. I love it. And there was another massive insight from a Reddit user named Kitamac regarding how we structure the flow of our day to avoid that exact same overwhelm.
Yes.
They argue that you must rigorously separate the act of planning from the act of doing.
Kitamac pointed out that if you wake up, sit down at your desk, and you don't already have a predefined, highly specific list of work for that day, you are burning your limited cognitive fuel on decision-making.
Right, because you are forcing your brain to figure out what you should be doing while simultaneously trying to summon the willpower to actually do it.
That overlap creates immense friction. Decision fatigue sets in before you've even typed a single word.
So it really sounds like the most effective strategy is to split your personality into 2 distinct roles. Like, you need to be the CEO and the employee.
That is the perfect analogy for it.
The CEO is the version of you who sits down on Sunday night, looks at the calendar with that realistic outside view we talked about, and makes the strategic plan for the week. The CEO decides what the 20% high-impact tasks are.
Yeah.
And then on Monday morning, you wake up as the employee. The employee doesn't question the strategy, doesn't wonder what to do next, and definitely doesn't renegotiate the timeline. The employee just executes the plan the CEO left on the desk.
And to really solidify that CEO-employee dynamic, our sources point back to James Clear, who offers 2 incredibly practical strategies to force the employee into action. First, for recurring tasks, you must strip the emotion out of the process by setting a strict, unbreakable schedule.
Meaning you don't wake up and ask yourself if you feel like going to the gym.
Exactly. The CEO has already decided that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. are gym days. The employee doesn't get to debate it. The decision has been permanently removed from the morning routine.
But what about the non-recurring things? The big, scary one-off projects like publishing a portfolio or launching a website. You can't just schedule those for every Wednesday forever.
For those, Clear says the CEO must manufacture external urgency. You have to pick a hard public date.
Okay.
You put it on the calendar, you announce it to your network, or you pay a non-refundable deposit. You artificially create a scenario where the pain of not doing the task becomes greater than the pain of actually doing it.
But this brings up kind of the ultimate hurdle. We can hack our amygdala with 3 dishes, and we can lock ourselves into schedules. But how does the employee stay motivated long-term when the work inevitably gets boring or frustrating or just repetitive?
And that is the transition from amateur to professional. When we rely solely on public launch dates or a boss's threat of being fired, we are relying entirely on external motivation. External motivation works, but it causes immense stress and eventually leads to burnout. True, sustainable productivity requires shifting to internal motivation.
Meaning you do it just for the sake of doing it.
It means you derive a sense of autonomy, competence, and deep purpose from the work itself. When the employee connects the daily, boring grind of writing code or practicing scales to a deeply held personal value or a mastery of a craft, the need for an external deadline begins to fade.
Wow.
The work itself becomes the reward rather than the fear of missing the deadline.
We have covered some truly transformative ground today. Let's quickly retrace the path. We started by confronting the fact that we absolutely have to stop confusing motion, that comfortable dopamine-releasing act of planning and researching with actual vulnerable action.
Then we looked at why we never seem to have enough time for that action.
Right.
The planning fallacy guarantees that our inside view will always underestimate the timeline, so we must protect ourselves by relying on historical data and the outside view.
And once we have realistic time frames, we use the 80-20 rule to identify the few high-leverage tasks that actually matter.
Yeah.
And we fiercely protect them using Cal Newport's deep work, treating shallow tasks as mere cognitive cooldowns.
And finally, to survive the daily grind, we separate the CEO's planning from the employee's doing, and we use minimum viable steps to bypass our brain's natural threat response to overwhelming tasks.
But here is the brilliant, slightly painful irony of this entire deep dive. For you, listening to us break all this down today, this is technically just motion.
It is. You are gathering information, which is a necessary runway, but it is still just preparation. If you start here, you haven't actually progressed.
Exactly.
To make this deep dive translate into action, you need to extract one specific concept we discussed today, whether that's identifying your 20% tasks, washing exactly 3 dishes tonight, or turning off your phone for 20 minutes of productive meditation and physically apply it to your life right now.
It's about getting off the runway. And as you go about the rest of your day, I want to leave you with one final thought to turn over in your mind. We spend so much time searching for the perfect app, the ultimate color-coded planner, or the flawless time-blocking system. But what if the ultimate productivity hack isn't a system at all? What if true productivity is simply learning to sit with the emotional discomfort of doing the hard, uncertain thing first, instead of hiding behind the warm, safe illusion of getting ready?
That is the profound shift right there. Real progress isn't about eliminating the friction. It's about walking directly into it.
So tonight when you finally hit that pillow, you won't just be exhausted from running in circles. You'll be tired because you actually moved forward. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Now go take some action.